Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. I have never liked working late. The silence of the empty building always felt unsettling to me, but I had no choice. The deadline was the next day, and I was very behind on my project. The office, usually full of phone calls and conversations, was eerily silent. The only sound was the constant hum of the air conditioning, and every now and then the creaking of the building structure as it settled. My name is Tom, and I work as a graphic designer. It was a Friday night, and the office was completely deserted. Everyone had left hours earlier, excited for the weekend. I watched my last coworkers leave, envying their freedom. I took a deep breath and focused again on my computer screen, determined to finish my work. As the hours passed, the light outside gradually faded until everything was swallowed by darkness. The only illumination came from the monitor and a small desk lamp beside me. A chill ran down my spine, but I quickly brushed it off. It's just my imagination, I told myself. I had always hated working late. Around midnight, I decided to take a break. I stood up and stretched my muscles, sore from having stayed in the same position for so long. I walked toward the break room to pour myself a cup of coffee. The hallway was dark, and my footsteps echoed across the tiled floor. When I turned on the light, the fluorescent tubes flickered a couple of times before filling the room with a cold, harsh brightness. I poured the coffee and leaned against the counter, enjoying the comforting warmth of the liquid. Then I thought I heard something. A faint noise, almost like a whisper. I stood still, trying to listen more carefully, but nothing else followed. Only the hum of the vending machine and the distant sounds of the city. I shook my head and let out a nervous laugh. "You're going crazy, Tom," I muttered to myself. I finished my coffee and went back to my desk. However, I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I looked over my shoulder several times, but the hallway remained empty. When I reached my workstation, I noticed something strange. My computer screen was completely black. I moved the mouse, but it did not respond. Frowning, I tried to turn it back on without success. I bent down to check the cable and saw that it had been unplugged. A chill ran through my body. I knew I had not touched that plug. With trembling hands, I plugged it back in and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, and I let out a sigh of relief. But it did not last long. A message appeared on the screen. "Get out." I stared at those words, feeling my heart race. It had to be a joke. Someone had to be messing with me. But who? Everyone had left hours ago. I looked around, half expecting to see someone hiding, but the place was completely empty. I tried to ignore the message and keep working. Maybe it was exhaustion making me imagine things. I opened my project file and tried to concentrate, although the feeling of unease would not go away. The minutes passed slowly and my anxiety kept growing. I could not stop looking at the clock, wishing for the night to end soon. Suddenly I heard the noise again, this time louder. It sounded like footsteps in the hallway. My heart lurched. I jumped to my feet, the chair scraping against the floor, and the sound stopped. I swallowed hard and moved slowly toward the hallway, every step measured and silent. The corridor looked just as it had before, empty. I decided to check the entire office one more time just to be sure. I walked past the empty desks and cubicles, watching every shadow. When I reached the far end, I noticed something out of place. The door to the small meeting room was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Finally, I gathered my courage and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark, with only a little light spilling in from the hallway. I stepped in slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dimness. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around in shock. I tried to open it, but it would not budge. I was trapped. Panic fluttered through me. I pounded on the door and shouted for help, but my voice only bounced off the walls, sending back an empty echo. Then I heard it again, the whisper, this time closer, so close that I could feel a breath brushing the back of my neck. I turned around slowly, my eyes wide with terror. In one corner, a shadow moved. It was a motionless figure watching me. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure did not answer. It remained still, threatening. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and turned on the flashlight. I pointed it toward the corner. The light revealed an old dusty mannequin with glass eyes that seemed to stare blankly into nothing. I let out a shaky laugh. It was just a mannequin. A cruel prank, nothing more. Trying to calm myself, I moved toward the door again. But just as I was about to turn the knob, the whisper came back. "Get out," said the voice, deep and icy. I froze, feeling my blood run cold. The mannequin had not moved, but the voice. It was so close that it seemed to come from inside my own ear. I did not wait to find out more. I yanked at the door with a strength I did not know I had and ran down the hallway. I grabbed my backpack without looking back and bolted toward the exit. I rushed through the building doors and breathed in the cold night air, gasping desperately. I never stayed in that office at night again. I finished the project from home. No deadline was worth the terror I felt that time. To this day, I still do not know exactly what I lived through. Maybe it was a prank. Or maybe it was something else. Something beyond all explanation. The only thing I know is that I will never forget that voice ordering me. Get out. Story 2. It was a cold and silent afternoon when my family left for a trip. I waved goodbye, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. I had the whole house to myself for the weekend. My plan was simple: catch up on my favorite shows and enjoy a feast of junk food. At first, the idea of being alone did not scare me, but as the night went on, a strange feeling began to take hold of me. The house was too quiet. Every creak of the old wood sounded louder than usual. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. I settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn and turned on the television. The TV light flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the living room walls. After a while, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen, a faint tapping sound. I paused the television and listened closely, but the sound disappeared. I shrugged, thinking it was just the house settling. I focused on my show again, determined not to let my nerves get the best of me. However, the noise came back. This time it was louder, more insistent. It was no longer just a light tap. It was a knock, a call. My heart started pounding. I stood up and slowly walked toward the kitchen. I peeked around the corner, but everything seemed normal. The doors and windows were closed. I let out a sigh of relief and turned to go back to the living room. Then I saw him. A man was standing just outside the kitchen window, staring directly at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, filled with madness. He had an unkempt beard and was wearing dirty, torn clothes. I felt my blood run cold. I froze, unable to move or speak. The man raised his hand and hit the glass again, harder this time. That sound snapped me out of my trance. I stumbled backward, panic taking over. I had to do something. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "What is your emergency?" a calm voice asked on the other end of the line. "There's a man outside my window," I whispered barely audibly. "He's trying to get in." "Stay calm," the operator replied. "Help is already on the way. Can you lock yourself in a room?" I nodded even though she could not see me. "Yes, I can," I answered in a shaky voice. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing. I could hear the pounding of my heart roaring in my ears. The operator stayed on the phone, speaking to me in a calm tone, assuring me that officers were about to arrive. Suddenly, a crash shook the house. The man had broken a window. He was inside now. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. I heard his heavy footsteps climbing the stairs, getting closer and closer. "He's inside," I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking. "Stay where you are and do not make a sound," the operator said. "The police are about to arrive." I could hear him testing the doors one by one. When he got to mine, he started banging on it hard, trying to break it down. I pressed all my weight against the door, praying it would hold. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The blows grew more violent, more desperate. Just when I thought the door was going to give way, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The man must have heard them too, because the banging stopped suddenly. Silence filled the house again. I heard hurried footsteps going down the stairs and then the front door slamming shut. He had tried to escape. Moments later, I heard voices downstairs. The police had arrived. "You can open the door now," the operator told me. "The officers are with you." I unlocked the door slowly and stepped out. My legs were shaking so badly that I could barely stand. I made my way downstairs carefully and saw 2 officers waiting for me. "Are you okay?" one of them asked with a concerned expression. I nodded, still in shock. "He broke the window," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "We have him," the other officer added. "He is in custody. You are safe now." A wave of relief rushed through my body. The nightmare was over. The police stayed with me until my parents came back, making sure everything was in order. I told them every detail of what had happened, and they reassured me that the man would be kept under supervision. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face pressed against the window glass. But despite the fear, I felt grateful to be safe. Days later, the police informed us that the man was a homeless drifter with a history of breaking and entering. He had been arrested several times, although he always managed to escape. This time, they promised he would not do it again. Since that night, I always make sure that all the doors and windows are securely locked before going to sleep. I even installed an alarm system. The experience left a mark on me, but it also taught me to be more cautious. And before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time making it this far, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next horror stories. Your support means a lot. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 3. I was 12 years old the first time I stayed home alone at night. My parents were going to attend a dinner and promised me they would be back by 10. At first, I was excited. Finally, a night of freedom. I could eat all the ice cream I wanted and watch horror movies until I fell asleep. It sounded like the perfect plan. The night started well. I had my favorite ice cream flavor, chocolate chip cookie dough, and my favorite blanket wrapped around me. I chose to watch a movie I had seen dozens of times, but one that always managed to scare me just enough. It was about a haunted house, and even though I knew every twist and every scare, it still made my heart race. It was around 9 o'clock when I heard it for the first time, a soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from upstairs. At first I thought I had imagined it, but then the sound came again. It sounded as if someone was walking up there. I paused the movie and listened carefully. The house fell silent again. It must be the house settling, I told myself. I had heard my parents say that thousands of times. I tried to focus on the movie again, but I could not. Every little sound made me jump. The wind outside was blowing hard, making the tree branches scrape against the windows like long, bony fingers. The sound was unsettling, but I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the wind. Then the noise came back. This time, louder. It was coming from upstairs. No doubt about it. My heart started pounding so fast I felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and sent my mom a message. "Are you on your way back yet?" I waited, but there was no response. I looked at the time, 9:15. There were still at least 45 minutes before they came back. I swallowed hard and decided to be brave. I stood up, clutching my blanket as if it were a shield, and slowly walked toward the stairs. Every step creaked under my feet, and each creak made me shiver. I reached the top and heard nothing, only silence. I took a deep breath and started checking each room one by one. The first was my parents' room. I pushed the door open carefully and peeked inside. Everything was dark, but in order. Then I checked my room. I did not see anything unusual there either. I started to feel a little foolish. Maybe after all, it really was just the house shifting. I was about to go back downstairs when I heard the noise again. This time it was coming from the attic. The attic door was slightly open, and a chill ran down my spine. I had always been afraid of that place. It was dark, dusty, and full of old things my parents had collected over the years. I almost never went up there, but that night something was different. I felt that I had to check it. I slowly approached the door, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to fill the hallway. I reached out and pushed it open. The attic stairs were steep and narrow. I hesitated for a moment, but then the sound came again. A faint dragging noise, as if something was moving up there. I swallowed hard and started climbing. Every step creaked beneath my weight, and with each one I felt as though I were walking deeper into a nightmare. When I reached the top, the darkness was even thicker than I remembered. I felt along the wall until I found the light switch. The light flickered a couple of times before turning on, casting unsettling shadows all around the room. I looked around. Old furniture, dust-covered boxes, and cobwebs in every corner. Everything seemed normal. I was about to turn around when something caught my attention. One of the old trunks was slightly open. I knew that trunk was always kept closed. I moved closer slowly, my hands trembling. I lifted the lid carefully. Inside, there were only old clothes and a few dusty books. I sighed with relief. I'm overreacting, I thought. None of this is real. But then I heard it again, this time right behind me. I spun around, and my heart nearly stopped. In the dimness, there was a figure, tall, covered in deep shadow. I could not see its face, but I could feel its eyes fixed on me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I took a step back, panic taking over. Who was it? How had it gotten into the house? I took another step back and the figure moved forward. I could hear my own heart wildly out of control. Then it spoke. Its voice was low, cold, almost inhuman. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "This is my house now." Fear made me react. I turned on my heels and ran. I did not look back. I rushed down the attic stairs, nearly tripping, ran through the hallway and raced down the main staircase. I grabbed my phone and bolted out the door, not stopping until I was halfway down the street. With trembling hands, I dialed my parents' number. When they finally answered, I told them everything through sobs. They came back immediately and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched every corner of the house, including the attic. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no trace at all of the figure I had seen. They told my parents it had probably been my imagination, that maybe I had watched too many horror movies. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew I would never forget that night. From then on, I never felt safe in that house again, especially when I was alone, because deep down I am convinced that figure is still there, hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting. Story 4. It was a dark and stormy night, one of those nights when the wind howls like a ghost and the rain pours down in sheets, forming such a thick curtain that it was barely possible to see the road ahead. I was sitting in the back seat of our old but faithful car while my mother was driving. We were on our way home after visiting my grandmother. The trip had been long, and I could feel the weight of exhaustion on my eyelids. Little by little, I felt sleep starting to take over. Suddenly, the car came to a stop with a deafening screech, making me jolt awake. The seatbelt dug into my chest as I was thrown forward. I looked up and saw a man standing in the middle of the road. He was soaked by the rain, his clothes torn and covered in mud. His face was hidden in the shadows, but his eyes were intense, wide, like those of a trapped animal. My mother gasped and immediately locked the car doors. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. We both stared at the man, not knowing what to do. He looked desperate, but there was something about him that gave me a bad feeling. I felt a chill run down my spine as my heart pounded violently. Before we could react, 3 more men emerged from the darkness. They appeared out of nowhere, as if the storm itself had spat them out. They surrounded the car, pounding on the windows and yanking at the door handles. My mother screamed, and the terror in her eyes made my blood run cold. "Lock the doors," she shouted at me. "Do not open them for anything." I obeyed immediately, although my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely manage the lock. My breathing was fast and uneven. The men were shouting something outside, their voices distorted by the pounding rain and the closed windows. I could not understand what they were saying, but I knew it was nothing good. One of them lifted an iron bar and began striking the driver's side window. The glass was holding, but I could already see the first cracks starting to form. My mother's eyes widened in panic, and I understood that we had to act fast. "Hold on tight," she said in a shaky voice. "We're getting out of here." She slammed her foot on the gas. The car roared and lunged forward. The man with the iron bar barely managed to jump out of the way. The car brushed past him while the other 3 scattered, shouting furiously in the rain. The car skidded dangerously across the wet pavement, but my mother managed to keep control. Her face tense, she kept driving as fast as she could, without taking her eyes off the road. I looked back. The figures of the men were disappearing into the darkness and the storm. My heart was still racing. I felt like I could not get enough air. "Are you okay?" my mother asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. I nodded, although I could not say a word. Fear had left me paralyzed. She reached one hand toward me and took mine. Her touch was trembling but comforting. "We're safe now," she said in a shaky voice. "Everything is okay. It's over." We traveled in silence for several minutes. The only sounds were the steady drumming of the rain on the roof of the car and the hum of the engine. My mind, however, would not stop. Who were those men? What did they want? Why were they there, in the middle of nowhere, trying to get into our car? As we got closer to our neighborhood, the storm began to ease. The rain became lighter, and although the sky was still dark, the streetlights appeared in the distance like a beacon of hope. I began to feel my body slowly relax, the tension fading as I realized we were close to home. Finally, we turned onto our street. My mother parked the car in front of the house and turned off the engine. She stayed silent for a few seconds, breathing deeply. Then she looked at me seriously. "Never forget this," she said. "Always lock the doors. It does not matter where you are or how safe the place seems. Always, always make sure they are locked." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. That night had been a terrible lesson about how quickly something can turn dangerous. A lesson neither of us would ever forget. When we entered the house, my mother wrapped her arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. The warmth of home surrounded us like a protective blanket, slowly driving away the fear. We were safe, and that was the only thing that mattered. We never talked much about what happened that night, but the memory remained. It was a painful reminder of how important it is to stay alert, remain cautious, and above all, keep the doors locked. A lesson learned the hardest way, but one that would no doubt keep us safe in the future. Story 5. My name is Sarah, and I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of town. It is a cozy place, surrounded by tall trees that sway gently in the wind. I have always liked the peace it offers, but lately something strange has been happening. It all began with small things. Food would go missing from the pantry, or I would find the kitchen window open, even though I was sure I had closed it. At first, I thought I was being careless or that my memory was playing tricks on me. One night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a soft noise right above me. It sounded like light, hesitant footsteps moving through the attic. My heart started pounding, and I tried to convince myself that it was just the house settling, or maybe a raccoon. However, the next morning I found more unsettling signs. An empty can of beans on the counter, one that I had not opened, breadcrumbs on the floor, and the attic door slightly ajar. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I took a flashlight and slowly climbed the stairs to the attic. The air up there was heavy and dusty. Dust particles floated in the beam of light. When I got to the top, I saw it. A small makeshift bed made of old blankets and a few empty food cans. Someone had been living there. A mixture of fear and curiosity came over me. Who could it be? And why in my house? That night I stayed awake, listening for any sound. Around midnight, the noise returned. I quietly got up and went to the kitchen, where I waited in the dark. Minutes later, a male figure emerged from the attic. He was thin, wearing worn-out clothes, and his face showed signs of exhaustion. When he saw me, he froze. "Please, don't call the police," he said in a trembling voice. "I have nowhere to go." I saw fear and desperation reflected in his eyes. Something inside me softened. Instead of feeling terror, I was overwhelmed by a strange sense of compassion. "I'm not going to call the police," I replied calmly, "but I need you to tell me why you are here." His name was Jack. He told me that he had lost his job and his home a few months earlier, and since then he had been wandering the streets. One cold night, he found access to my attic and turned it into a shelter, sneaking in to eat and sleep. I did not know what to do. I could not allow him to keep living in the attic, but I also could not bring myself to throw him out. So I decided to help him. I prepared a hot meal for him, and we sat together at the kitchen table. As he ate, Jack told me about his life, his dreams, and how everything had fallen apart. I listened carefully, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine connection with someone. The next morning, I took him to a local shelter where they helped him get in touch with social services. We began working on his resume, and I contacted some friends who might have job opportunities. Jack was grateful. In his eyes, I could see hope beginning to return. Days turned into weeks. Jack and I established a routine. He would come to the house for meals, and then we would work together on job applications and interview practice. Little by little, he regained his confidence. One afternoon after he left for the shelter, I realized how much my life had changed since I met him. I no longer felt alone. Jack had become a friend, someone I truly cared about. One day, he came to my house with a big smile and wonderful news. He had gotten a job at a local store. We celebrated with a homemade dinner. I could see the pride on his face when he thanked me for believing in him when no one else did. "You deserve it," I told him emotionally. "I'm very proud of you." With his new job, Jack was able to rent a small apartment. He moved out of the shelter, and our visits became less frequent, although we stayed in touch. He came over for dinner once a week, and we would talk about our lives. Over time, his situation improved even more. He got promoted, made new friends, and began volunteering at the same shelter that had once taken him in. Watching him grow and move forward filled my heart with joy. One night, Jack invited me to dinner at his new apartment. When I walked in, I saw a framed photograph of the two of us on the wall. taken during one of our dinners. He smiled and said, "You changed my life, Sarah. I don't know where I would be without you." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him. "You changed mine too, Jack," I replied. "You reminded me of the power of kindness and how important it is to help one another." Since then, Jack and I have remained great friends. Our friendship, born from an uncertain and frightening situation, transformed into something beautiful and lasting. I learned that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the most comforting ones, that compassion and generosity can truly change lives. My small house on the edge of town no longer felt empty. Now it was filled with memories, laughter, and a friendship born in the most unexpected place. And every time I hear the soft creak of the attic, I smile, remembering how it all began. Story 6. I arrived at the rundown motel on Watt Avenue in Sacramento late at night, exhausted after a long day of traveling. The place was every bit as gloomy as the online reviews had described, but it was cheap, and my exhaustion outweighed any concern about appearances. I checked in, picked up the key, and dragged my heavy suitcase to room number 12, hoping only to get a few hours of rest. The room turned out to be even worse than I had imagined. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, a faint smell of dampness filled the air, and the bed, with its sunken mattress and worn sheets, was hardly inviting. I set my luggage on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, which creaked pitifully under my weight. As I sat there, I felt an itch on my arm. I scratched it, but then I noticed another one on my leg. Looking closer, I saw something that made me shudder. Small reddish insects were crawling across the bedspread. Bed bugs. Perfect. Just what I needed. Sleeping there was no longer an option. I looked around for an alternative, and my eyes landed on the tiny bathroom in the back. It was dirty, but the bathtub, although old and stained, seemed like a safer refuge than that infested bed. I took a spare blanket from my suitcase and spread it inside the tub. It was not comfortable, not even close, but at least the bugs would not devour me. I lay down, covering myself with my jacket to keep warm. The cold and hardness of the porcelain made it almost impossible to sleep, but exhaustion finally overcame me, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. I do not know how much time passed before I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. For a few seconds I did not know what had startled me. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, a barely perceptible movement in the main room. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it had to be the wind, or maybe some animal wandering outside. But the next sound was louder, a dull thud, as if someone had bumped into a piece of furniture. There was no longer any doubt. Someone was inside my room. My breathing quickened. With trembling hands, I pulled the small pocket knife I always carried out of my pocket. It was the only thing I had to defend myself. I carefully opened the blade and gripped it tightly. I slowly climbed out of the bathtub, trying not to make any noise, and moved toward the half-open bathroom door. Through the crack, dimly lit by the yellowish light from the street lamp outside, I could make out a shadow moving near my suitcase. Fear turned my blood to ice. An intruder was going through my things. I swallowed hard and, gathering my courage, pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "Who's there?" I asked, trying to sound firm, though my voice trembled. The figure froze and turned toward me. It was a tall, thin man with an unkempt beard and wide, startled eyes. His expression reflected the same fear I felt. We stood there for a few seconds, staring at each other, motionless, until he finally spoke in a shaky voice. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I thought this room was empty." I tightened my grip on the knife. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice breaking with fear. The man raised his hands in surrender. "I'm sorry, really. I was just looking for a place to sleep. I saw the window was open and thought I could stay here tonight. I didn't know someone was staying here." My mind was racing. He did not seem violent, but I still could not trust him. "You need to leave," I said firmly, hoping he would not notice how terrified I was. He nodded slowly. All right. I'm leaving. I haven't taken anything, I swear." He took a few steps toward the door, but before leaving, he turned back for a moment. "You should close the window," he said seriously. "It's not safe to stay here." I watched him cautiously as he left. The moment he disappeared into the darkness, I locked the door and dragged a chair against the knob to block it. My heart was still pounding, but a small sense of relief washed over me. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and took a deep breath. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I had been seconds away from a potentially dangerous situation, and yet it had ended without violence. I looked around at the damp, crumbling room and knew I could not stay there another minute. I quickly gathered my things, making sure not to leave anything behind. The itch on my arm reminded me of the bed bugs, and I shuddered in disgust. I left the motel and checked twice to make sure the car doors were locked. The sky was beginning to brighten. The first hints of dawn were appearing through the clouds. I decided to drive to a small nearby diner where I could have a strong cup of coffee and collect my thoughts. Sitting there, surrounded by the comforting murmur of breakfast and the smell of freshly brewed coffee, I replayed everything in my mind. It had been a terrifying night, but I had come away unharmed. Even so, the intruder's last words kept echoing in my head. "It's not safe to stay here." He was right. That experience left me with a lesson burned into my mind: to be much more careful about the places I choose to stay, and above all, to always close the window. Story 7. When I was a child, my parents bought a large old house in the middle of nowhere. They said it had been an excellent deal, an opportunity too good to pass up. We moved in full of excitement to begin a new life, but we had no idea that the house held a dark history, a history that would change our lives forever. The house was beautiful in a strange way. Tall, imposing, surrounded by trees that stood guard over it like sentinels. It had enormous windows and a wide porch, but from the very first day, something felt wrong. The air inside was always cold, even in the middle of summer. At night, strange sounds echoed through the house: creaks, murmurs, whispers that I seemed to hear only when I was completely alone. At first, I thought it was my imagination. My parents seemed happy. They worked hard to turn the house into a home. My father painted the walls in cheerful colors, and my mother filled the rooms with flowers and laughter. For a while, the house was full of life, but little by little, the joy began to fade. It was as if the place absorbed their energy, their happiness. I watched them begin to argue over trivial things. My father started to get sick. The doctors could not find any cause, but his health grew worse with each passing day. One night I woke up when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I left my room and saw my mother standing at the top of the stairs, staring into the darkness. Her eyes were empty, distant, as if she were in a trance. I called to her, but she did not respond. Then she simply turned around and went back to her room. The next morning, she remembered nothing. Things got worse. My father grew sicker and weaker every day. He complained of constant pain, but the doctors still could not find an explanation. My mother was no longer sleeping well. She had nightmares every night and looked exhausted, worn down. I tried to help, but I was only a child. I did not understand what was happening. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, I found an old book covered in dust, with pages yellowed by time. It told the story of the house. It had been built more than 100 years earlier by a man named Jonathan Crane, a cruel and ruthless millionaire who mistreated everyone around him, including his own family. His wife, Mary, was found dead inside the house, and rumors said that he himself had cursed her. From that moment on, every family that lived there suffered a tragedy: fires, unexplained accidents, sudden deaths. I showed the book to my mother, but she laughed nervously. She did not believe in curses. "It's just an old story," she said. "Meaningless superstition." She tried to burn the book, but it would not catch fire. No flame would touch it. That same night, the house seemed to awaken. The doors slammed shut, the windows shattered, and the walls trembled as if something were alive inside them. My father died soon after. His death was as sudden as it was unexplained. The doctors could not understand what had happened. My mother sank into a deep sadness. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped living. And not long after, she died too. I was left completely alone in that house, feeling its cold embrace around me, as if it were slowly absorbing me. As soon as I was old enough, I left, but the house never let me go. I carried it with me in my dreams, in my thoughts, in the constant fear that its shadow was following me. Years passed. New families bought the house. I wanted to believe that maybe they would have better luck, but deep down I knew they would not. The curse was too strong. A young couple moved in full of hope. Soon after, they lost their son in a senseless accident. Later, a single man moved in there. He disappeared without a trace. Again and again, the tragedies repeated themselves. Many tried to cleanse the house. Priests, shamans, mediums, even paranormal investigators. No one was able to break the cycle. The place remained the same, a prison of pain that fed on those who lived there. Now, as an adult, I sometimes drive down the old road and pass in front of the house. It is still there, standing tall and defiant, with cracked walls and an air of sadness that can be felt even from a distance. I think about all the families who have suffered inside those walls, about my parents, about the lives the place has destroyed. And every time I look at it, I feel a mixture of anger and fear. I have thought about destroying it, burning it to the ground, ending its legacy of suffering. But what if the curse is too powerful? What if destroying it only makes things worse? Not long ago, I saw a new family arrive. They looked happy, full of hope. I watched them from the road and prayed, hoping that maybe they could be the ones to break the cycle. But inside, I know that will not be the case. I am afraid for them, afraid that the house will claim them, just as it claimed my parents and so many others before them. And yet I can no longer stand by and do nothing. One day, maybe soon, I will gather the courage to go back inside. I have to do it. I have to find a way to break the curse. For my parents, for the families who perished, and for the new residents who still do not know what awaits them. That house has taken too much, but it will not take any more, not while I am still alive. Story 8. I accepted the night shift as a security guard because I needed the money. It was not my ideal job, but the pay was good, and I thought it would be easy enough. My name is John, and this is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. The building where I worked was enormous and old. It had once been a factory, but now it was empty. My job was to walk through the facilities every hour, check that everything was in order, and write in the log that there were no incidents. I started at 10 p.m. and got off at 6 a.m. The first few nights were quiet. I brought a book to read and coffee to stay awake. I enjoyed the silence. It helped me think and pass the time. But on the fourth night, everything changed. As always, I arrived at 9:45 p.m. to take over the shift from Bill, a veteran guard who had worked there for years. Before leaving, he warned me. "This place is old," he said. "It creaks, groans, and makes strange noises. Don't let it scare you." I laughed and told him I was not scared that easily. At 10 p.m., I started my first round. The building was dimly lit, and the beam of my flashlight cast long shadows across the peeling walls. I checked the doors, the windows, the hallways. Everything seemed normal. At 11 p.m., I began the second round. That was when I heard something. A soft murmur, almost a whisper. I stopped to listen more carefully, but the sound stopped immediately. I shook my head, convincing myself that it was just the wind slipping through some crack. At midnight, I went down to the basement, the creepiest place in the building. The air down there was icy and damp with a strong smell of mold. I was about to leave when the whisper came back. This time it was clearer, louder, coming from the darkest corner of the basement. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice echoing through the empty walls. No one answered. I pointed my flashlight toward the corner, but there was nothing there. A chill ran down my spine. I finished my inspection as quickly as possible and went back upstairs. At 1 a.m., while crossing the main lobby, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around immediately, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, even though the feeling of being watched would not leave me. At 2 a.m., I decided to take a break in the security office. It was a small room with a desk, a chair, and several monitors connected to the building's surveillance cameras. I sat down, looked at the screens, and tried to find some explanation for the noises, but everything seemed calm. At 3 a.m., it was time for another round. I did not want to go, but I had no choice. As I walked through the empty hallways, the shadows seemed to close in around me. The whisper came back, louder and clearer. It sounded like a human voice, although I could not make out the words. Then I felt something icy on the back of my neck. A cold breath, very close. I spun around sharply. Nothing. Fear made me quicken my pace. I finished the round almost running and returned to the office, my body tense and my hands trembling. I wanted to leave, but I could not afford to lose the job. I tried to calm myself, repeating that it was all just noises from the old building. But deep down, I knew it was not. At 4 a.m., while watching the monitors, something froze my blood. On one of the cameras, there was a figure, tall, dark, motionless. It did not move. It was just standing there in the middle of a room. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the location. When I got there, the room was empty. I checked every corner, every door, every shadow, but no one was there. I returned to the office with trembling hands. I looked at the monitors again. The figure had disappeared. I tried to convince myself that maybe it had been a reflection, a camera glitch, but I knew it had not. I knew what I had seen. At 5 a.m., I was exhausted. I just wanted the night to end. I decided to do one last round. As I walked through the hallways, I felt that something was following me. I kept turning around, but I saw nothing. I reached the basement once again. The murmur was now deafening, as if it surrounded me completely. The air was freezing. Suddenly, a hand touched my shoulder. I turned instantly, and there was no one there. I ran out of the basement without looking back. I rushed up the stairs and did not stop until I reached the office, gasping with my heart on the verge of bursting. At 6 a.m., Bill arrived for his shift. The moment he saw me, he knew something was wrong. "What happened to you?" he asked. I told him everything. The noises, the shadows, the whispering, the figure on the camera. He nodded slowly and said in a grave voice, "You're not the first. They say this place is haunted. A worker died here years ago, and he never left. I quit that very morning. I could not bear to spend another night in that building. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers. Sometimes I hear them in my dreams, and I wake up drenched in cold sweat. I will never forget that night, the night I learned that some places are not really empty."